and you also start adding weights. So generally, with a total knee replacement, a patient can start to drive in about 6 weeks, maybe a little longer with a hip replacement, depends how quick the patient reaction times are, and then high impact sports are discouraged. And if you look at the health related outcomes research, because that's where we are going, significant improvements have been shown in the SF36 subcategories at 6, 12, and 24 months. But when they wait too long for surgery, they become deconditioned, and that's why one must encourage them for knee replacement, not too early, not too late. One has to find the balance, and I'm sure you rheumatologists know that where that balance is. And if you also look at the WOMAC and Oxford 12 scores, those have shown very important statistical differences post-operatively. So to conclude, hip replacements are highly successful procedures, and after surgery one can expect improved functions with very good long-term implant survivals, particularly when done for a primary hip replacement. At this I'll stop, and if there are any questions, I think we'll take them at the end or now.
Thank you, Dr. Shayar. It was very meaningful and very precise presentation. Now I'd like to call Dr. Professor Kamran Hamid. He's working in Ziauddin Hospital, Karachi. He would tell us when the back is not strong enough.
Assalamu alaikum. My time starts now. Okay, what I would like to do is deviate from the topic that was assigned to me in the favor of the audience, because what I wished was we take home some messages which we could apply in our clinical practice. So I'll be looking at a broader perspective than originally assigned, and I understand Dr. Nigat Mir will be talking about polymyositis in some of our presentation. So back weakness will not be a primary focus on this talk. So let's start. This is the roadmap. We'll talk a little about introduction, the epidemiology of the condition, and management. I have put in a couple of case histories which might be interesting for both the rheumatologists and the non-rheumatology group. So let's look at the facts and figures. It is the most common musculoskeletal complaint, and in fact, arguably, it is probably second only to common cold. So everyone in this audience has some time or the other experienced back pain. It has an annual incidence of 2 to 5%, point prevalence of 15 to 25% at any time, and affects 70 to 90% of the population. Accounts for 13% of health-related absences. But importantly, most cases settle quickly, with 90% of patients showing improvement by 8 weeks. Yet it is a significant problem. And this is why it is a complex problem. If you look at the back anatomy, the number of elements and items that can produce back pain are innumerable. And none of us in the audience would have the capacity to retain the names, attachments, insertions, and origins of all these muscles. But let's look at the basic unit. The basic unit, if we look at the skeletal component, is the intervertebral disc, the vertebrae, the facet joints, and the pedicles. And many of the conditions relate to that. The anatomical and functional unit is an articular triad consisting of the fibrocartilaginous intervertebral joint and the two synovial facet joints. The intervertebral joints allows for most of the flexibility of the spine and acts as load transmitters and shock absorbers. And these are the causes. This is not a comprehensive and an all-encompassing list, but just to give you a broad categorization of how we should look at joint back pain. There could be structural causes, inflammatory causes, infections, metabolic reasons, neoplastic, and referred pain. And of the structured, which is the most common, you will have you will have facet joint arthritis, prolapsed intervertebral disc, spondylolysis, and listhesis. And we'll talk about these conditions and demonstrate what are the key features in these. So what are the factors for back pain?